Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed.
On Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., Joe Biden is sworn in as President of the United States, and the Trump era is over.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
And he pledged to defend the Constitution. He urged Americans to overcome their differences in the search for unity.
My whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause.
On her way to the White House after the ceremony was Kamala Harris, the first woman, the first Black American, the first person of South Asian descent to become Vice President. As for President Trump, he'd already left Washington hours earlier, telling supporters that he would be back. We'll have details of the day's ceremony, the new president's message, and the work he's already started in the Oval Office in the past hour. Also tonight, as the number of COVID deaths reaches another record, we visit a hospital in Derby to talk to staff about the battle that they're waging. And severe flood warnings in Greater Manchester as Storm Christoph brings chaos and homes are evacuated.
Here in the East, cash for care home jabs. GPs are offered an incentive to vaccinate the most vulnerable by Sunday. And reject the rumours doctors plead with high-risk communities to trust the COVID vaccine.
Good evening. Joe Biden has been sworn in as the 46th President of the United States in a ceremony on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., the very place stormed by supporters of Donald Trump just a fortnight ago. And with that violence still fresh in people's minds, there was unprecedented security and far fewer people than usual because of the pandemic. Well, the new president declared that democracy had prevailed, and he pledged to defend the Constitution while urging Americans to overcome their differences in the search for unity. At Mr. Biden's side is Vice President Kamala Harris, the first woman, the first Black American, and the first person of South Asian descent to hold the nation's second highest office. Conspicuous by his absence was the outgoing president, Donald Trump, who'd flown to Florida earlier in the day while promising his fans to be back in some form. We'll be looking at the new president's agenda and what it means for US relations with the rest of the world. But we start with the events of the day with our North America editor, John Sopel.
Hugh, Donald Trump left the White House for the last time this morning. After that, an army of cleaners went in to spruce the place up. And then about an hour ago, Joe Biden arrived with his own broom to sweep away a lot of the Trump-era policies. The change is going to be profound. So far, so normal.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States.
This is what America does every 4 years. But everything about today was exceptional given the last 2 weeks, given the pandemic, given the security situation, given the presidency that was ending. At first glance, the west front of the Capitol looks much as it always does on Inauguration Day. But look the other way towards the Washington Monument, and the normal forest of people has been replaced by a garden of flags. A socially distanced inauguration for a nation tearing itself apart.
And repeat after me.
The oath of office taken by the man who's now tasked with healing the nation's wounds.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
Office of President of the United States.
The platform where he stood 2 weeks ago was the staging post for the assault on Congress. Then the mob ruled. Today, democracy had come through, but it was a close-run thing.
We've learned again that democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed.
He warned America was in the midst of a winter of peril, and as any new president had to confront such an array of problems, COVID, economic turbulence, racial unrest, and the passions inflamed by Donald Trump's insistence that the election was stolen.
Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this. Bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause.
Joe Biden never mentioned Donald Trump by name, but it was a firm repudiation of all that he stood for, though he was careful to reach out to the former president's supporters.
We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts.
At 78 years old, Joe Biden becomes the oldest man to become president, but the real history is being made by his deputy Kamala Harris, the first woman vice president, the first of black and Indian heritage, an example of the American dream.
So help me God. So help me God.
COVID has brought drabness, this inauguration had sparkle, with Lady Gaga, complete with gold microphone, singing the national anthem.
What so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming.
And Jennifer Lopez too.
Let's get
The political good and great were out in force. 3 former presidents were in attendance, Republican and Democrat, and former Vice President Mike Pence was there as well, choosing the inauguration over a rival attraction a few miles away. And that's because Donald Trump had decided to break with 150 years of tradition and snub Joe Biden. Normally, the outgoing president meets the successor at the front door and rides with him to the Capitol. But Mr. Trump was slipping out the back, still incapable of accepting that he lost the election. Though the former reality TV host turned film director to try to orchestrate his own departure. He awarded himself a military send-off, complete with 21-gun salute, and his parting shot will have delighted his supporters and horrified his detractors.
A goodbye. We love you. We will be back in some form.
And the music was spot on as he flew off on Air Force One for the last time.
It was my way.
By the time now ex-President Trump arrived in Florida, Melania had gone from somber black to beach club chic. Never comfortable in Washington, she might find the transformation a whole lot easier than her husband. Joe Biden is now in the White House and he wants to hit the ground running. There'll be a flurry of executive orders to reverse a lot of Trump-era policies. But policies always change with a new president. What will be so different is the manner of governing. Crazy Town is likely to be replaced by Dullsville, but maybe that's what America needs right now. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
But by now, as we just saw there, after several hours of ceremonial events, the president is in the White House, is probably in the Oval Office right now, where he's expected to get to work and signing those 17 executive orders that John was mentioning there. Those are presidential directives, if you like, which can take effect more or less immediately. Now, the aim is to begin reversing key parts of the Trump agenda on the environment, on immigration and on diversity, but top of the agenda, of course, will be a more focused approach to dealing with the pandemic, which has already claimed the lives of 400,000 Americans. Alongside that will be initiatives to stimulate the US economy, which has lost more than 10 million jobs over the past year. Let's go back to John Sopel, our North America editor. Can we talk about the pandemic, John, and how will the Biden approach differ to the Trump approach?
Well, I think that what we saw from Donald Trump was an inconsistency. Sometimes he was following the science, sometimes he was following his gut, other times he was following what business people wanted. I think with Joe Biden there's going to be much more focus on the science, and I think what he wants to see is the whole apparatus of the American state to get behind the vaccine rollout, which has been stuttering so far. It's been called Operation Warp Speed. It's felt a lot more slow than that, he also wants to see a mask mandate so that many more people are wearing masks when they're out and about as a way of cutting the infection rate. So that's what he's going to do on that. But he also kind of wants that to bleed through to what happens in the economy, a stimulus program as well. And as you say, undoing a lot of the Trump-era policies on immigration from the mainly Muslim countries, a pathway to citizenship for people who've come across the border from Mexico and from Latin America. So those are some of the things that he's going to want to do. It's still going to be on a knife edge getting votes through the Senate, where it's a 50-50 split with Kamala Harris having the casting vote. So there is a huge agenda, but don't believe it's going to be easy. There are going to be formidable obstacles in Joe Biden's way.
John, we'll talk again in a moment about other parts of the agenda, but thanks very much for now. That's John Sopel there for us in Washington. Well, Donald Trump lost the election despite winning more than 70 million votes nationwide. That's the second highest total in US history. And the concerns and frustrations of his supporters were very much in President Biden's mind when he was asking Trump supporters today to give him a chance to see what he could do, all part of the message of unity that Mr. Biden was delivering. But as our correspondent Ali Makboul discovered when he went to Texas, the new president has set himself a rather daunting task.
The inauguration here is marked by an upturned flag. So convinced is Eric Braden that Donald Trump somehow had the election stolen from him.
Copy that, guys. I appreciate y'all very much. Southern Patriot Council.
Eric's been so angry, he's been leading his right-wing militia onto the streets.
Today we're coming here to the Capitol in Austin for many reasons. None of them good.
They gotta say this, they gotta say that.
Back at his trailer home, he tells me he'll never accept Joe Biden as president, and that for him, the inauguration is a signal that his country is dying before his very eyes. The Stars and Stripes outside is upside down.
In distress? Yes, sir. Yeah, it is. America is deeply in distress, and we are on the moment and the brink of complete division. And
which looks like what?
Division? What it looks like is states like Texas that actually have the legal right to leave the union will do that.
That's fanciful, but it is an indication of the strength of feeling there is. The assault on the US Capitol has illustrated to many Americans the extent to which the right is prepared to go to lodge its protest. It's continuing to do so at state capitals across the country. But the events of the last year have shown that the left in America is also prepared to disrupt and make its presence felt. Last summer, they were roused into action not by misinformation from a president, but the killing of George Floyd. Protest leader Jay Gutierrez fears he'll be arrested many more times fighting white supremacy in America, especially now as he sees it, the right has been emboldened.
There's going to be, chaos in some way. There's going to be uprisings from their end. There's going to continue to be uprisings from our end of wanting to see change and wanting to see justice prevail. So I just think that you're going to see that intensify. I don't think in any way, shape, or form Biden winning, I don't see, there to be peace from this point.
Others on the left say the issues of inequality and poverty are ones that will keep them fighting too. Eric and his militia mate Tim wanted to show off their preparedness for the battles they're expecting.
Yeah, we got a problem.
It was a bit of a game, but one that ended up starting a fire that quickly spread. What the coming months bring
Hey, get that water hose!
may not be as comical or as easy to contain. Ali Makboul, BBC News, in Texas.
Well, after the Trump administration's rather turbulent 4 years on the global stage, President Biden declared today that America would rebuild its international alliances as world leaders sent their congratulations and good wishes to the new president. China and Russia will have their own pressing reasons for assessing the new president's priorities, as of course will the UK. We'll hear from John Sudworth in Beijing and Steve Rosenberg in Moscow in just a moment, but first our political editor Laura Kuenssberg at Westminster.
Well,
Well, UK Prime Ministers like to see American presidents as their diplomatic best friend. The two nations have a partnership that goes back for so long, with unrivaled working, particularly when it comes to security and defence. And when that friend is unconventional and unpredictable, as was Donald Trump, that can make for some very awkward political moments. So for the government today, it's a positive turning of the page. Now that's in part because Joe Biden's been clear. He wants to work with international groups like NATO, so important to the UK and its place on the world stage. But it's also seen as a positive because in number 10, they believe that Joe Biden cares about some of the issues where Boris Johnson really wants to make a difference, on climate change, for example. The Prime Minister today said it's a step forward, a positive day for America after a bumpy time. But less diplomatically, one former senior minister told me that the UK might lose some exclusivity, but they would gain predictability, and the whole thing would be less cringeworthy. It's sure that there'll be fewer fireworks and less drama, perhaps, in the relationship between the two countries. But tonight, the sense in the government is that the UK is gaining a more dependable friend.
On the face of it, Donald Trump has been a nightmare for China, hitting it with a trade war, trolling it over his allegations that the virus leaked from a laboratory here, and sanctioning its companies over their links to the human rights abuses in Xinjiang. But will Joe Biden be any better? Not only is his incoming administration continuing Trump's tough on China rhetoric, he's promising to rebuild alliances with democratic countries in Europe and beyond to better contain Beijing. But there's something else too. In Donald Trump, China saw the tantalizing prospect of a crisis in democratic values, a decline in American power, and a vacuum on the global stage into which it could step. In short, the chaos and confusion of Donald Trump made China's rulers feel good about themselves and their system. And for that, they may well come to miss him now he's gone.
There's little doubt that the Kremlin would have preferred 4 more years of Donald Trump in the White House. The chaos and division in America that characterized his presidency and the weakening of the Western alliance, all of that was welcomed here in Moscow. Plus, Donald Trump almost never criticized Vladimir Putin in public. But Joe Biden is a vocal Kremlin critic. He's already said that for America, Russia is the greatest threat. So Moscow is bracing itself for more sanctions. And when it comes to Putin-Biden, don't expect much personal chemistry. Joe Biden once recalled his visit to Moscow in 2011 when he was vice president. And the story goes that he looked Vladimir Putin in the eye and concluded that Mr. Putin has no soul. And he told him that. Hardly the ingredients for a beautiful friendship. But I think there will be a degree of pragmatism on both sides, which could help secure agreement on key pressing issues, like extending a key nuclear arms control treaty that expires in a few days' time.
Was Steve Rosenberg there in Moscow. Let's go back to Washington and have a final word with John on what's been going on there today. People talking about a new American presence on the world stage, John. How do you think that'll manifest itself?
I think what you're going to see, Hugh, is a return to the sort of consensus foreign policies that we've had from previous American presidents, broadly speaking, since the war, that you support the multilateral institutions like NATO, like the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, which Donald Trump pulled America from, like the climate change agreement that Joe Biden wants America to rejoin. And I think the key word was used by Laura when she talked about predictability. I think that Joe Biden will be fairly predictable, and he's surrounded himself by technocrats who know their subjects in the key positions. That said, Joe Biden's focus is also going to be very inward-looking on America. Remember how close America came to a kind of overthrow of Congress, unbelievably, just 2 weeks ago. There are still wounds from that. There is still going to be an impeachment trial of Donald Trump in the Senate. There is an awful lot of healing that needs to go on in America, and I think that is going to be the focus of his activities, even though on the world stage it may be a more familiar America that the world is dealing with.
John, many thanks again. John Sopel there with his analysis on the day that Joe Biden was inaugurated. Let's turn to the day's other main news then, because the number of COVID deaths recorded in the past 24 hours in the UK was more than 1,800. That's yet another record since the pandemic began. But more than 4.5 million people across the UK have now received their first dose of a vaccine. The pressure on the NHS is still extreme, and our latest report on hospital staff this week is from the Royal Derby Hospital. Our medical editor Fergus Walsh, producer Nikki Stiasny and camera journalist Rob Taylor compiled this report.
I've been in nursing for 33 years and I have never seen anything like this.
In all honesty, it is physically and emotionally exhausting.
I don't think anybody feels that we've seen the worst of this yet.
If we carry on this trajectory, we'll be completely overwhelmed in a couple of weeks.
The warnings keep coming, and not just from London. This is the Royal Derby Hospital. Nearly half its patients have COVID.
CPAP mask on for a couple of hours.
Paul Robinson is 50. He's terrified.
I had an horrendous night, and I won't lie, I messaged my wife this morning to say that I wasn't so sure if I was going to survive. We've just bought ourselves a new beautiful bungalow which we're supposed to be moving into, and it's our dream, and I may not see it.
The intensive care unit has doubled in size and is still growing, but they've already had to transfer some critically ill patients to other hospitals.
This time it's been a perfect storm, really, of the new variants arrived, we've hit winter at just the wrong time, Christmas has arrived at exactly the worst time it could have done, and there's just been a steady, inexorable rise of cases. We are still on the up ramp of the patients coming through.
Check the length on the remaining lines.
Caring for those patients places huge demands on staff.
1, 2, 3, go.
Every ICU uses this procedure, proning, turning patients on their front to help their breathing.
This is the very definition of intensive care. All over the country there are medical teams like this one trying to keep thousands of COVID patients alive. All that and coping with other winter pressures as well.
There is light amid the darkness. Treatments are getting better. Steroids and some arthritis drugs have greatly improved the chances of survival. But to provide care, you need staff. So many are off sick. Those left are drained. On one shift, nurses had to walk past COVID deniers demonstrating outside the hospital.
We've got staff who are absolutely exhausted and traumatised. A lot of staff are struggling with their mental health. The nurses are coming in and working extremely hard. A lot of them are doing extra shifts. They're all exhausted. And then to see protesters saying that it's not real for the nurses then to come in.
Those on the COVID front line say if the public could see through their eyes, they'd take more care.
It's not a hoax, it's very real. People are dying daily within the hospital, and I myself have held the hand of patients that are dying within the department. I think people need to take it a little bit more seriously, and I don't think they're aware of the impact.
The emergency department has separate entrances for COVID and non-COVID patients.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Like scores of other hospitals across the UK, they're approaching their limits.
If we reach a point where the hospital is so full that we can't get patients out of the emergency department in a timely fashion, the whole system down here comes to a halt. And that's when we start holding patients on ambulances. That's where we start to see the real risks of patient harm creeping up in the emergency department.
There is a path out of the pandemic via the vaccine, but the benefits won't be felt here for many weeks. For now, hospitals are bracing for worse to come. Fergus Walsh, BBC News, Derby.
We'll talk to Fergus in just a moment. Before that, let's have a look at the latest official government figures, which are revealed today, showing that there were 38,905 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means that on average, the number of new cases reported per day in the past week is 42,026. And as you can see on the chart there, that's been falling. Across the UK, an average of 39,068 people were in hospital with coronavirus over the 7 days to Sunday. That includes suspected cases in Wales. 1,820 deaths were reported. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. As we've heard, that's the biggest single total reported so far. On average, in the past week, 1,218 deaths were announced every day. The total number of deaths so far across the UK is 93,290. And let's get a quick update on the programme of mass vaccinations. 343,163 people have had their first dose of one of the 3 approved vaccines in the latest 24-hour period. That's the most yet in a day. And it takes the overall number of people who've had their first vaccine to 4,609,740. So as promised, Fergus is with me, our medical editor. In your report there, Fergus, where you talked to staff and those involved, you then said braced for worse to come. What did you mean by that, and what can viewers understand by that?
Well, the appalling record death toll today, Hugh, surpassing another record yesterday. Each one, someone being mourned tonight by family and friends. The UK has the highest COVID death toll in Europe, the 5th highest in the world, and it underlines yet again that with this new, more transmissible variant, we are in a more precarious, a more fragile position in terms of controlling the virus than at any time in the pandemic. Many of those who have recently died will have been infected around Christmas time, but it wasn't until the end of December and early January that we saw that huge surge in cases, and that is only just beginning to feed in to the daily death toll. At some point in the next week or two, we should mercifully pass the peak, but the numbers dying and in hospital are going to remain very significant throughout winter. The one solace is that the protective effect of vaccinating the most vulnerable will before long begin having a positive impact.
Fergus, many thanks once again. Fergus Walsh there, our medical editor. Well, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has chaired another meeting of the government's Emergency Cobra Committee to discuss the continued threat posed by Storm Christoph. The emergency services in South Yorkshire and Greater Manchester have already declared major incidents. People living in the northwest, Yorkshire and the Midlands are being urged to prepare for the risk of significant flooding, with up to 2,000 homes being evacuated in Didsbury. Our correspondent Judith Morris is there with the latest for us tonight. Judith?
Yeah, and while there are more than 300 flood alerts and warnings across England, there are now just 4 at the most severe level. 2 of those, which were declared in the last few minutes, are on Merseyside at Maghull. The other 2 are here where I am at Didsbury, south of Manchester, and the Environment Agency in the last hour has told us that this is the area where 2,000 or so properties are being evacuated. Now, we've seen people here leaving, but also other residents saying they're going to chance it. They're moving things upstairs. They don't want to go. There is some concern generally around how you manage an evacuation during the pandemic. And Manchester City Council have been quick to reassure people. They say on 3 points. Firstly, that if you leave your home here under order to evacuate, you're not in breach of COVID legislation if you go to stay with family or friends. Secondly, there is a COVID secure rest centre for people who feel that's the best option. That's at Wythenshawe in South Manchester. Thirdly, they say that if you are clinically extremely vulnerable or are having to self-isolate at the moment and find yourself in a situation where you may need to evacuate, that there are other accommodation options which the council are helping to coordinate. So a range of different possibilities. You can see as well that the snow is falling heavily here, and the River Mersey behind me has extremely high levels. It's racing past. It's expected to peak at about 11 o'clock tonight. But it's not just here in Manchester where people have been taking precautions against flooding. All the rivers around Yorkshire have been running high. In York, the Ouse is expected to peak tomorrow. They've put extra flood defences in there. Problems as well on the roads in Cleveland. In Rotherham, the train station closed because of flooding. A range of different problems all over the place. But this in South Manchester seems to be really at the epicentre where people are being told 2,000 homes to get out.
Judith, many thanks for the update there. Judith Moritz, our correspondent in Didsbury. And just to remind you that your BBC local radio station will keep you up to date on Storm Christoph. You can listen on BBC Sounds. Obviously, there's updates as well on BBC News Online. Let's return then to our main story, which is the inauguration in Washington, D.C., which involved not only the president, but also the new vice president. 56-year-old Kamala Harris is the first woman, the first black American, first person of South Asian descent to hold that position. Our correspondent, Lebu Diseko, joins us now from the White House with the latest.
I think we're going to miss our slot.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President-elect of the United States, Kamala Devi Harris.
It took nearly 250 years for America to reach this moment, for a woman to hold the second highest office in the country.
I, Kamala Devi Harris, solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all.
America's new vice president is the daughter of immigrants born to an Indian mother and Jamaican father. Both were involved in the civil rights movement of the 1960s, something she says shaped her.
I was taught that I had a responsibility to be a part of the fight for justice. Good morning.
That quest for justice, perhaps the motivation for her career in law, rising to become the Attorney General of her home state of California. But there are those who say she's not the progressive prosecutor that she claims to be. They point to an approach they say was too harsh on black men and say she didn't do enough to tackle police brutality.
I stand before you today to announce my candidacy for President of the United States.
In 2019, she launched her own bid to become US president. It was unsuccessful, but there was one particularly memorable moment. During a debate, she hit out at Joe Biden for working with senators who'd supported racial segregation and for his opposition to busing black children to white schools.
You know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools, and she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
But it didn't stop Mr. Biden from choosing her as his running mate.
We did it, Joe. You're gonna be the next president of the United States.
For her childhood friend, this is a moment that she was made for.
Did you see this in her future when you were kids or teenagers?
Oh, absolutely not. We were kids or teenagers. No, we were bad. We hung out. No, but as she progressed into her role and got into the DA's office and then the Attorney General, I saw, yes, this, you know, you could be the President of the United States. And look at you, she's right here.
Kamala Harris is a step away from the presidency, but with this honor comes the burden of expectation and responsibility. The wounds inflicted by America's divisions are still raw. She will have to try and heal a country in chaos while carrying the weight of her historic victory. Lebu Diseko, BBC News, Washington.
With that is all from us tonight. In a moment on BBC One, we'll have the news where you are. Before that, here's a reminder of the words and the images which marked the inauguration of Joe Biden as the United States began a new chapter in its history. Have a good night.
Stars
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. do solemnly swear.
On the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming.
The will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed.